So it's time for the third and final part of Globalisation EQ1 revision. This is part 3. So this session is going to look at the role of political and economic organisations, which again is all coming to try and answer what are the causes of globalisation and why has it accelerated in recent decades. Always keep that at the centre of what we're trying to get at here. So a number of key terms were introduced during this particular section. I am not going to go through them all now. However, the important thing is that you make sure when you are studying that you are aware of these terms, and more importantly, you can use key geographical language for this section in your answers. So if you were doing a 12 mark that was talking about the political or economic organisations, you were referring to some of these key terms. You know, if you were talking about trade blocks, can you put some of the ones in the top half in? Foreign direct investment, could you mention that? Or special economic zones, if we're talking about governments themselves being more open to globalisation. So one of the important things underpinning this section was the idea of a number of these political organisations are promoting free trade. Now, what does free trade mean? Well, the economic organisations play a part, but so do governments and so do TNCs. So you can see how, although I'm saying we can look at economic and political organisations separately, you will realise that when we're discussing things like free trade linked to globalisation, it's really important that you understand the role that they all play in increasing globalisation. So, for example, governments take away barriers. That makes trade difficult and costly, which allows TNCs to invest. TNCs begin to increase. We then get foreign direct investment in different nations, largely because of things like outsourcing. So the idea that countries might have headquarters in developed countries and outsource production to local companies. That then stimulates trade and so on. We then become more interconnected, and there's a slightly longer version of that there that you can pause and read through yourself. But what we can see, even by just looking at this free trade diagram, is that governments, TNCs, processes of foreign direct investment, and all those key terms that were in that previous slide all play a part. There's a really good clip here which you can watch later. I've put the title at the top here, The Role the IMF and World Bank Play in the Global Economy. You can just look that up on YouTube and it'll take you to that clip. Quite useful if you want to recap. I use the example in the lesson of the World Trade Organization and Pakistan. The story goes back to 1995 when Pakistan joined the World Trade Organization. It didn't realize that a more liberal, fresh trade regime would in fact give transnational trawlers, particularly from India, access to their 200 square mile water area just off of the coast, which before that was designated an exclusive sovereign economic zone. But when the industrial trawlers come in, the local fishermen simply couldn't compete anymore, and the fish stocks were depleted significantly. Some more detail there. So although Pakistan was trying to be more open and liberal in its approach to trade, on a local level, remember we talk about players, the charity Action Aid came in to look at the local villages along the coastline and said that they were now suffering from hunger and unable to catch the significant numbers of fish needed to survive along that coastal area. So when we think about the role that WTO played on Pakistan, the fishermen along these coastal areas, even up to 2010, there's still reports from ActionAid saying that the locals are struggling, and there's a few more recent examples too, but the people are starving, they don't have bread to eat. I can't give food to my family, or the other basics, some quotes up the top there. Now, You might be thinking, what's bread got to do with fish? But it's because the fishermen were selling their catch as well as using them to live off. So they now don't have the money to buy the other foods that they would have in the past. Again, worth pausing here to develop your notes on the local impact. So we've mentioned there then an example of Pakistan being impacted by joining what is supposed to be an organisation that facilitates free trade and the ending of protectionism. But as you know, for Pakistan, that particular example didn't go too well. One of the other organisations you were looking at is indeed the World Bank and its official goal and the reduction of poverty by promoting foreign investment and international trade. The interesting part here and the slight negative is the idea of structural adjustment with its granting loans. Do have a look at your notes on that. The International Monetary Fund, we made reference, again, going back to what I said there, to the strict conditions imposed on the loans. Important to realise, is it accelerating, promoting globalisation, allowing countries to develop in a way that TNCs can enter more easily? Or is it simply making these countries more dependent on the international organisations? Is it a form of neo-colonialism? Interesting to think the influence that these international organisations are having in some of the world's poorest countries. Important that you have a summary document. I would consolidate your learning on understanding the background, the purpose, and has it helped globalisation or not? Now, I'm going to leave that to you. You tell me if they have. But go back to your notes and make sure you have all three of those nicely sitting there to be revised. And any questions do, of course, come and see me. But that is quite an interesting part that hopefully you enjoyed. There's a little bit from a textbook there that does evaluate it and talks a little bit about the IMF rules and regulations are strict and controversial, sometimes puts pressure on the governments to cut back on health, education, and sanitation, which is not great. The World Bank is considerable amounts of money here, 65 billion in loans and grants. However, again, strict conditions. And remember the connections to superpowers and the important countries in the world, that the World Bank presidents have all been American citizens. So quite important to think of that as an evaluation. The WTO, another example, has failed to stop the world's richest countries, the USA and the UK, from subsidising their own food producers. So it might be telling people to stick by these rules, but in actual fact, it's not a level playing field because your two biggest countries themselves are not following the rules. And if you think of Pakistan, it did open up their fishing grounds and the result wasn't great. I mentioned a little bit about SAP's structural adjustment programs. They are, you can of course go back to your notes and or pause it here if you need to develop your notes a little bit more on this particular area. So moving on then to trade blocs and national governments, which was the next section that we moved on to. And I talked a little bit about the importance. I said you need three contrasting countries here, and you were developing a table, which you need to make sure you've got in your notes now, of China, North Korea, and India, contrasting approaches to letting foreign direct investment come in. And you can see here from this really interesting table, you can see the FDI inflows, that is the foreign direct investment that's coming into these countries. And I think the important thing to note here is understand the history of China's changing approach to this, which starts from 1978. I know that sounds a bit historic, but that was when it launched what's called this open door policy, where it was letting foreign countries and TNCs to invest in what we now know as special economic zones, SEZs, which I have up here for you on the screen. This all adds to your picture of your example for China. And remember, I said North Korea is slightly different. You're basically saying that they're very closed and not letting the investment. And look where that's got them in terms of a globalized economy and globalized country. India is the other one that you should look at. But I would definitely make sure you understand these special economic zones, be able to talk about the four of them that were set up and why they were set up to allow foreign firms in to benefit from the cheap labour. They brought in new technology and management practices, which help transform investment in China, which you can see they're all on that east coast that we now know as being a very, very productive area. Another series of terms that I introduced you to linked to foreign direct investment, offshoring, foreign mergers, foreign acquisitions and transfer pricing. It is worth just making sure that you, again, can engage with those terms if you're doing a 12-mark answer. It's engaging in the key geographical terminology within your answers. I'm not asking you to regurgitate word for word the definition, but make sure that you can use them as key language in your answers. I've shown you these slides before, but it's your key takeaways from Chinese FDI approach. I've summed it up there in a number of bullet points. There's 5 of them. Again, do feel free to pause. I'm not going to read that out, but there's some good figures. Remember, when you're doing peel paragraphs, point, evidence, explain, link. You know, there's evidence in there, isn't there? There's figures that you can use for your notes. So again, if you were unsure about the rise that China went through and how it developed so fast, I showed this cool little flow diagram here, which I think is really, really useful to show when the open door policy began. It then allowed reforms in rural areas. It provided the conditions, the preconditions for takeoff, as Rostow would say, which eventually industrialization grew rapidly on that east coast. And then it flows down talking about the growth of urban areas, the SEZs, the flow of TNCs coming in, and the overall increase in lifestyle, bringing 400 million people out of poverty. Amazing how a policy change that we can track back has such important future benefits. And there is really useful page from the other textbook that you don't have here that sums up the open door policy. Again, this is a useful paragraph if you were doing an essay on this. There's a little bit there about iPhones and workers earning $40 a day for making quality goods. Remember, it's important not to mix up. The iPhones are actually made by a company called Foxconn in the Shenzhen SEZ. Some people got mixed up in their answers and make them quite weak by talking about Apple's factories when actually they outsource it to a company called Foxconn. So we then went on to talk about trade blocks, and really important you understand what a trade block is, where goods, money and workers can flow freely over national borders, and you can see the different levels of trade block you can have. Quite useful to keep up to date with the EU content at the moment. As you'll know, January is going to be a big time for that. So it's all in the news at the moment about whether the UK can get a trade deal or not. That links in very well with this section, so it is worth keeping up to date. But important to remember these 4 main things. What do trade blocks do? They promote free trade between all member nations. They make trade between member nations as easy as possible. They negotiate joint trade deals, and they place trade barriers on trade from outside the bloc. Again, it's that type of knowledge that helps develop your paragraphs. A number of benefits that they have. Again, economies of scale, competitive advantage, job creation, economic growth. Lots of examples in there that you can pause and develop this further. Criticisms, they may create trade wars. Sometimes the interdependence becomes a problem. One nation feels that it's too great of an interdependence, and actually maybe if its economy is one of the stronger ones, it feels it's losing out a little. That's one of the reasons why many people did vote for Brexit. Again, feel free to pause if you want to get any more examples for your notes from here. Do trade blocks help globalisation? Because I guess that is the key question we're looking at. So yes, they encourage more trade between member nations. They definitely encourage a wider flow of goods and capitals between members. They often do deals, intra-trade block deals. So again, it's giving you more power. If you're just a small nation, you're now part of a trade block that's trying to negotiate with another trade block. That's quite useful in that sense. No, maybe they reduce trade from outside the trade block. Maybe they promote regionalisation. It can also leads to quite significant trade wars that are not positive, and also many people feel that their sovereignty has been lost. And again, many people voted for Brexit for that reason. So maybe it doesn't help globalisation in that sense. A summary of EU, NAFTA, and ASEAN. I would make sure that you know at least two of them very well, and can talk about their aims, how they've changed over time, and what they actually do. Type of question you could get. I mean, here's a very old question actually, which gives you a source. Suggest why different groups of people disagree about the need for trade blocs, such as the EU. So again, you need to know the benefits, the positives and the negatives there. Some key terms that you could indeed use. Possible structure to a 12-mark question. Well, here's, oh, it's not there, but what are trade blocs? NAFTA, positive, negative forces. Again, feel free to pause this if you wish to look in more detail. You're also asked to look at how we measure globalization, and COF is the index that you looked at. It's basically a Swiss company that measures globalization on three areas: social, economic, and political. The 2018 figures are there. A lot of people always get confused because they think COF is an acronym that links to globalization that they need to know, but as you can see, it's actually a German word that is very, very long, which basically means Economic Cycle Research Institute. Switzerland, Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden, UK, Denmark, Austria. Interesting, the countries are the most globalized. A lot of them are actually countries that are Northern Hemisphere, European, largely. So what does that tell us? Worth thinking about. There are some positive and negatives about COF. We went through them in the lesson and they can be viewed here. There's the positives. And the negatives, is it really right to be using McDonald's or IKEA as your cultural benchmark when some of them may have Burger King or Bobby's Burgers, that are still spreading social globalization? It's promoting the westernization of food. But just because it's not McDonald's doesn't mean it shouldn't be ranked. So there's a number of negatives like that. A few more are listed here for you to go through. I've summarized it there as well. You could argue that it's positive and negative for all those reasons that we find there. COF's interesting. It fits. Remember when we talked about places that are switched on and off? What we find is the places that are most globalized tend to be the ones that are highest in our Human Development Index. Countries that are least globalized tend to be the low income / developing countries. So those that are not globalized, the switched off places, tend to be the least developed. The other index you could have a quick look at is A.T. Kearney. Similar areas that it looks at: political engagement, technology, technological connectivity, personal contact, and economic integration. But most of the work we do looks linked more at COF. But there is A.T. Kearney looking at Global Cities Report, which is quite good from a more regional point of view, where when we talk about global hubs and core periphery, and I said that sometimes you get hubs that might not be in a core area, like a city, but the city itself is a hub. So that's where this cities index is quite useful. This is from 2018. But again, interesting to see the ones that are at the top, mostly developed. So where are we going with all this? Are we going on a, what is closing? What is these political and economic organizations doing? And this cartoon's got the suggestion here that not only have your American plants closed and your Mexican plants closed, we're now moving to lower income countries. It's just these TNCs and US linked bodies allow the world, in the name of free trade, to keep on finding the TNCs to find the cheapest place they possibly can to produce goods, which is kind of race to the bottom almost in terms of jobs within the developed countries. We then looked at areas that you could consider switched off from globalization then. And I've got a good example down the bottom there of Gambia's ex-president Yahya Jammeh, who, when he left a few years back now, he couldn't take it that he lost an election, tried to stay in power, then eventually flew out the country in a jumbo jet with some luxury cars and bags and bags of cash. Apparently, they think over his time he stole $362 million, but also left the country after a 22-year rule with lots of flash cars and money. I think he's still in hiding somewhere at the moment, but he was a very interesting leader. He was holding monthly clinics to say that he could cure HIV as well because he'd been given special powers. So he was very interesting character, worth looking into if you want to look at the history of Gambia over the last quarter century. But switched off, why switched off? Well, you could argue politically it had very bad leadership, in fact, very corrupt leadership. Economically, that's obviously going to have knock-on effects too. Physically, if you look at it, it runs, you can see the map there along the Gambia River. It's very small and, doesn't go much beyond either side of the river. And there are good historical reasons they are linked to politics and economic factors linked to colonialism. And we discussed that in the lesson. Worth bringing that up. Important that you mention the historical reasons why it might still be switched off. So really good. Hopefully you've got that in your notes. The interesting figure I've got down there, less than 2% of users subscribe to fixed broadband services. So very few have access to the internet, some via mobile phones, very few by fixed broadband services. The cost remains high and up to 48% of people are living in poverty. So really switched off, definitely switched off in many ways, including access to the internet. Finally, the section looked at TNCs, and we said that our TNCs, many people describe them as the architects of globalisation. They're really important in setting up new markets. They help develop new markets. They set up global production zones. They're involved in outsourcing and offshoring, all to maximise their profit, which they do through globalisation. Lots of key terms there for you to learn, but that essentially is the great role they play. There's some really useful stuff you could extract there for a peel paragraph on why TNCs are so important. But that point, globalisation, is really important. And what are they doing? Tailoring it to people's tastes. Cadbury makes Chinese chocolate sweeter. Religion and culture, McDonald's and Domino's Pizza will change to vegetarian options in Hindu neighborhoods in India. MTV Arabia avoids showing some more sexualized music content on their Middle Eastern channel. Laws, I mean, we know that if you're making cars, you've got to have your driving seat in a different position. Local interest, think of reality shows like Jersey Shore or Geordie Shore. They gain larger audiences if they are refilmed using local people from different areas. So instead of just relying on one brand, they take it to different distinct accents, and it stimulates extra interest. Lack of availability. This is a really interesting one. The beverage company Sab Miller, who normally does beer, use cassava to brew beer in a number of African countries. And again, that cuts the cost of importing barley. So all of this is localizing the TNC product to suit the local market. So I would have quite a few examples here, many examples you can use. McDonald's is a very good one. Disney is the other one that we talked about, culturally localizing and spreading a very westernized culture, actually, and also economically using a range of products from theme parks to films to streaming channels to merchandise, all to try and push the profit. So pulling it all together, you could think about planning a question either now for your end of year exam or for your final exam based on this question. Examine the main factors that have accelerated globalisation. That would be a great 12 marker that pulls together all of the revision sessions I went through. I went through 3 revision sessions now online, and hopefully, if you think of all that knowledge you've got in the 3 of these videos, you should be able to answer, examine the main factors that have accelerated globalisation. And if you're not sure, here's one way that you could structure it with your little intro, your 3 peel paragraphs with the content there, the role of international organisations, the role of TNCs, the role of technology. There's 3 things that you could say are important. And then your conclusion, I would comment on the most important or most significant of those 3 factors you look at. Each factor should have a sense of evaluation as you go, though. You could do a little plan at the side, write off your key geographical terms, tick them off as you do them, clear paragraphs, exemplify. Remember, give those figures that I've shown, not read them all out, but lots of figures I've shown in these sessions. That's where you'll get the evidence. Bug it, make sure that you, in all exam questions, you box the command words, you underline the keywords and the issues and the focus of the question, and then go back and read the question again to make sure that you know exactly what you're trying to answer. So there it is. Go and have a shot. Feel free to write an answer to the question if you want to do this revision, depending on when you're watching this. At any point, then you can obviously hand in this question and I'm happy to have a look. But there you go. Go, go, go. From me, Miss Cunningham, all the best. Good luck, whether you're doing the end of topic test, end of key question test, mock, end of year final exams. Who knows when you're going to watch this again? But all the best from me, Miss Cunningham. Thank you very much. Any questions? Get in touch. Cheers. Ciao. Bye-bye.